Hello there. It's Paul from Cigars. You know me. So today I want to talk to you about cutting your cigar. Because you know that if you don't cut it first, you can't really smoke it. So here we have a cigar. And here we have your basic traditional cutter. You'll notice it has two blades. They cut straight across. It's called a guillotine. And what people typically do is stick the cigar in and cut off a piece. However, where do you cut it? You have to sort of pick the exact right spot. And the exact right spot is right where the shoulder of the cigar begins to curve. So you're barely cutting off more than the cap. Really only that much. Now, that actually brings up the biggest problem with traditional guillotine cutters. And that is that almost everybody that uses them tends to cut way too much off the cigar. So you'll see people doing stuff like that. And that's really wrong. That's really wrong. It's really only the very, very tip. So how do you avoid that problem? Because you don't want to cut off too much of the cigar. If you cut off too much, you wind up with little bits and pieces of tobacco in your mouth, and that's no fun at all. There are a couple of ways to fix this problem. One way, if we look over here, let's see if we can get this right in the picture where it belongs. Anyway, the way it works is you put the cutter down on the table and you put the cigar in it that way and you cut it that way, and you're guaranteed that you're not cutting off too much, because down on the table this way you're only able to cut off about that much. Which brings us to our second type of cutter. A second type of cutter. And this one I call an idiot-proof cutter. It looks just like a regular guillotine, except the hole doesn't go all the way through. It's closed off on the back. So what does that mean? In practical terms, it means you can't cut too much off the cigar, because the cigar won't go deeper into the cutter. That will cut the exact right amount. That works out well. And like I said, it's idiot-proof. In the guillotine arena, of course, there are fancier lighters instead of the straight style. There's also, this one's from Cigar, which made this type famous. But this type of cutter, still a guillotine, works the same way, but the blades pop open sideways. You stick your cigar in like that. You only stick it in a little ways because you don't want to cut off too much. And there you go. Some people, however, do not like to cut the end off the cigar. They don't like to cut too much, too little. They don't want to cut the end off at all. They want a nice, neat little hole that directs the smoke right down the middle of your palate. And there are two ways of getting that out of your cutter. One way is to use a punch. This is one. There's many different styles, but the concept on all of them is the same. You push out the blade, and you can see the blade is round. It's very sharp, but it's round. And the concept of this kind, called a punch cutter, is you put the sharp end of the blade right in the middle of the head of the cigar. You give it a little twist. Let's see here. You give it a little twist, and what you wind up with It's a nice, neat little hole. And a little piece of tobacco in your punch cutter. So you push the little red button, the blade pops back in, and the piece of tobacco pops out on the floor. But the main point of this is you don't bust up the head of your cigar, and you get a nice, neat little hole. Here's another type. This is the second method for getting a small, directed opening in the head of your cigar instead of cutting off the end. Instead of this little hole, you can use one of these, and you can see the blade is different. Instead of being a guillotine cut, it's a blade that is, see if I can show this to you properly. You can see the blade is actually a V. It's very sharp at the top, but it's a V. And to use one of these is actually very simple. Open it, press the cigar in, clip it shut, and what you get is a V. You get a notch right down the end of the cigar. You can't cut off too much. It's just the V. The smoke is nicely directed, and the head of the cigar remains intact because A, that's the way you want it, and B, you don't want little bits and pieces of tobacco in your mouth, as I mentioned before. Everybody hates that. And this cuts just such a nice little bit out of the end of the cigar that you don't have to worry about it. Then there's one last method. This is not an official method. This is just my personal preferred method. It works like this. You see people sometimes bite a cigar. I am not a fan of biting the end off a cigar. You wind up with tons of loose tobacco that way. You know, the guys that just bite it off. However, there's a proper way to bite the end of a cigar. You use your front teeth only, and you're basically going to take the head of the cigar and just nip with your teeth the tiniest little bit of tobacco off. That's all you got to do. That is only removing the cap. Nothing else off the cigar at all. All the filler and binder are still intact in there. And it gives you the same effect as a punch cutter or a V cutter. But you never have to lose it. You never have to worry about losing it. You never have to think about where your cutter is. It's always right there. And honestly, if I lose this cutter, I have more to worry about than how I'm going to cut the end of my cigar. So we won't worry about that. So anyway, that's our story for today about cutters. I'll be back with you shortly about other things like lighters, about blending, about different kinds of ashtrays and why that matters. All kinds of stuff that you would know already if you were smoking 12 cigars a day for 48 years like me. Anyway, that's it for now. Smoke often, smoke happy, smoke at Cigar Cigars. Talk to you soon.